Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Sam. I am a student of the Bible. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for 22 years, and I write. You can read my writings on samberg.org. My training involves biblical studies, theology, and biblical languages. I want to do a follow-up on the last video I did, Luke chapter 2, where I said the King James mistranslated a word in Luke chapter 2 where it says that they wrapped Jesus in cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no room for him in the inn. And I said that word "in" there, which is in the Greek word katalumati, which is the dative form of kataluma, is mistranslated there. It should not be translated "in." It should be translated "guest room," like the newer translations do. And so the immediate questions that pop up from that statement are, okay, well, can the word kataluma ever be translated "in"? And the answer is yes. I said that in the last video. It can be translated "in." So then why can't it be translated in Luke chapter 2? So that's what I want to talk about today in this video. There are only 3 instances that we know of where the word kataluma are translated or used in the Gospels. I think in the whole of Scripture, there's 3 times it's used. Luke chapter 2, when talking about the birth of Jesus. Luke chapter 22, and then there's another one, I forget where the exact reference is, but both of the ones used outside of Luke chapter 2 are describing the upper room that Jesus has the Last Supper in with his disciples. And he tells his disciples, go find a kataluma, which, a place where we can have the Passover meal together. And so it's used as a guest room, an upper guest room in a house. And so those are the only 3 instances this word is used. And so the KJV translators even recognize that. When you go into those passages later on, you realize, they've translated it guest room. They don't translate it "in." So then the question is, why did they translate the word kataluma as "in" Luke chapter 2? Context always determines how you can translate, because it can mean "in," but it also can mean guest room. But why doesn't it? Why shouldn't it? That's a better question. And the answer, there's 2 answers to why this word should not be translated as "in," but should be translated as guest room in Luke chapter 2. And these the 2 reasons why are, number one, because the King James, why they may have translated it "in" versus guest room, the King James translators did not have a really good grasp or knowledge of first century Judean houses. The archaeology just had not happened yet. But since 1611, when those were translated, the last 400 years, there's been all kinds of archaeological discoveries. And what we have discovered is that houses in first century Israel had animals and stuff in the basement of those houses, the first floor of those houses where the kitchen was, where the storage was. Animals would come inside and they would sleep there. They would graze there. They would hang out there. It was kind of like a common area, kind of like our garage with a kitchen kind of a deal. And that's what first century Jewish houses would look like. And then you'd climb up the ladder and go upstairs. I'll show a picture here again. Go upstairs and there would be rooms, 4 rooms available. And there would be a guest room normally where family, friends of family, all that could stay. And that is likely what is being referred to here. That this is not, they couldn't find room at an inn, so they had to go off to a stable. And likely the reason that the King James translators translated it "in" was because they had no knowledge of the archaeology. They had no knowledge of what a first century house would look like. And they saw animals present, and they were like, well, the animals aren't in houses, because they were using their own context and going, wait a second, there's no animals in houses. We don't do it like that. There's animals out in the stable. There's animals over here in this cave. And so the tradition also was like, there's a cave there, because there was a lot of misunderstanding coming from like the proto-evangelion of James, with all these traditional things that pop up that really aren't true. They're just kind of there. And so because of the tradition and because of their not understanding first century archaeology, because it really just wasn't available in 1611, they look at the word kataluma and they go, okay, it's translated guest room, but that doesn't seem right because they're with animals. It must be there was no room in the inn. They were traveling from Nazareth to Bethlehem. They must have wanted to go to an inn. It really kind of misses the point of why they were going to Bethlehem, to be with family, to register, like all that kind of stuff that Luke's trying to tell us. They were missing the context clues and just going, well, there's no room at the inn. There's Kataluma guest room now. So they went and they went off to a cave or a stable somewhere because there was no room in the inn. So that's one reason why they may have, why we know that. Why they may have translated it this way, but we know because of that first century archaeology, this is what happens. This is the kind of house that they have, and the guest rooms were upstairs. And they knew that because of Luke 22 and all that, the way Luke had already translated Kataluma. But we know that there were animals in the house. There was a manger there, a place where they would feed, where they would sleep, all that kind of stuff. And so we know that because of archaeology. And so we go, wait a second. It's more likely that Mary and Joseph went to the home of one of their families and were just trying to stay there, but it was pretty packed. It was too full, so they had to be down in the common area. The second reason that we know that this word should not be translated in is because Luke actually uses a different word when he wants to talk about an inn, and I'll point this out to you. Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37, Jesus is telling a parable. Luke is recording that Jesus is telling a parable of the Good Samaritan. And that parable, it's a pretty famous one. There's a certain man who's going from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he gets jumped by some robbers. And then he says that a priest and a Levite walk by, and they see the man. They walk on the other side. Likely, this is Jesus kind of poking fun at the overzealous piety and pious rituals that they would partake as they were heading towards the temple. Likely, this priest and this Levi had already ceremonially washed in their mikvah at home, and they didn't want to encounter anyone that would make them unclean before they go to the temple. So they see this, and they're like, no, we're going the other side of the road to stay ceremonially clean. We don't want to have to wash again. So they walk all the way, and there's all kinds of archaeological discoveries and ideas about this, where they had their own road, they had their own way up to the temple so that it would stay ceremonially clean. And so this is likely Jesus poking fun at that, but that's not the point of why I'm telling this. But then a Samaritan comes alongside, and the Samaritan isn't even Jewish. They're not considered to be Jewish. They're not considered even to be on par. They're considered to be lower than dogs in the eyes of Jewish people. So this was like a slap in the face to all the Jewish elites who were there kind of going, wait, with the Samaritan, we'd hate those guys. But the Samaritan comes and he has pity on the man. He has compassion for the man. He bends down, and then verse 34 in the King James, this is important, in the King James it says, and he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast. And then he brought him to an inn and took care of him. Verse 35, and on the morrow when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host or the innkeeper, and said unto him, take care of him, whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come back I will repay thee. Okay, so verse 34, brought him to an inn. Now, if Luke wanted to make the point that in Luke chapter 2, when he said there's no room in the inn, if he wanted to drive home that point that the word kataluma can be used both for guest room, an upper room in a house, and for the word inn, like a hotel, like a lodging place for travelers, then he would have used the word kataluma here. The problem is he does not use the word kataluma here. The word he chooses to use for inn is the standard word for inn, which is pandokeon. Okay, pandokeon. And it means an inn, a hotel, a place where travelers would lodge. It referred to a public lodging place where travelers could find accommodation, provide shelter for those who are resting on their journey. So here's some of the cultural and historical background of this word and this idea. It's that in the ancient Near East, inns were essential for travelers, especially from long distances. These establishments varied in quality and in amenities, often providing basic necessities such as food, water, place to sleep. They were crucial for merchants, pilgrims, and others who travel for various reasons, offering temporary refuge from the hardships of travel. Here's the issue, though. These pandokeons were usually located in bigger cities where people were actually migrating or traveling to. Bethlehem was not one of those cities. Bethlehem was a small backwater town, like a one stoplight kind of town that did not have one of these there. These would have been likely found in Jerusalem. And the reason they would have been found in Jerusalem is because people traveled from a long distances away from the diaspora sometimes back into Jerusalem during Passover week to go to the temple. Okay, so they would have these inns, these lodging places there for these travelers. Bethlehem would not have had that. It was a small, tiny little town that by the time of the first century was kind of like out of use. Basically, if you weren't born there, didn't grow up there, you didn't visit there, you didn't go there. No one went to Bethlehem. And so this was this little tiny town. It wouldn't have had one of these. And so it's likely that Mary and Joseph, as traveling from Nazareth to their family in Bethlehem, would have found their house that their family was in, and it would have found it full, and they would have had to stay downstairs in the common area instead of in the guest room. There's no guest room available for them. And if Luke wanted to say, oh, there was an inn in Bethlehem, and the inn was completely packed and full, they got turned away, and they went to a cave or went to a stable, then this is kind of missing the point of first century families, why they would have gone, all that kind of stuff. So likely what's going on here is Luke chapter 2, like I said in my video before, is Luke, the author of the Gospel of Luke, saying that Mary and Joseph went to their family house and there was no guest room available for them. And Mary was fully pregnant, and they ended up having to sleep down in the common area. And she ended up having her baby in the common area. It was likely that they weren't ready for any of this, and so they had to go in where the kitchen was, or the storage area, grab some loose cloths, wrap up Jesus. They tried to find a place to lay him, because you can't just lay him on the floor, the dirt floor. And so they laid him in the manger, this stone trough that the animals would have been feeding and snacking out of, and laid him there, and that's where he would have slept, to keep him off of the dirty, dusty, gross floor. And that is why Luke decides to use kataluma instead of pandokion. All right, so hopefully that is helpful in a word study and understanding, even within the context of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, how these words mean things, and sometimes they mean multiple things, and we can't just assign one because it makes sense to us. We have to try to understand historically what's going on, all right? Hopefully this was a helpful video to you. Like, subscribe, write some comments, and I'll see you in the next one.